If you thought I was in tune with my inner child before, there can be no doubt in your minds now. For about 10 attoseconds, I'd thought about making this the new MechTech series, but then I thought, nah, plenty of other people have already done that on here far better than I ever could. Several of whom I'm going to be more or less straight up aping the homework of for this video. Links to those channels will be down below for anyone interested. Now, just how do I mean to set about my little project? Quite simply, I'm going to build the ultimate mobile playhouse every 10-year-old boy dreams about and makes believe is his bed, cardboard fort, or treehouse if he's lucky enough to have one. Think of the Millennium Falcon, Serenity, the Magic School Bus, or the little rocket ship from Little Einsteins. For this, the first and most important question we must ask and answer is, just what level of technological prowess and realism are we shooting for here? Are we going for a more rustic country western in space vibe? Or does the hyper-advanced technology stand-in for magic rote more suit your fancy? As you can probably already start to see, each subject on this can be, and has been, the subject of entire YouTube series or channels by itself. And while I'm no sort of technical expert on any of these subjects, I have participated in enough of these spheres for long enough to have at least formed an educated opinion on them. And this is what I present to you now. Obviously, just as who is the form following the function of what, a question is the bullet preceding a target. And our target in this particular expedition into Wonderland, I would define as follows. Look everywhere we can think of for anything cool we can find. Kill anything that takes any unreasonable umbrage with us. And of course, we'll want to take our gang of free radical besties along for the ride as well. So we'll need to provide adequate accommodations, as well as spare some extra room for whatever booty we collect along on our miscreant adventures. Also, since these aren't exactly going to be your typical weekend excursions or family road trips, we're going to need to make some allowances for creature comfort since, while you can technically get out and stretch your legs in space, this would probably create more problems than it solved. As I'm sure you can imagine, to fill all of these disparate boots is going to take, if you'll excuse the pun, a rather stellar leap of either faith or logic, depending on just how far in the future you're watching this, given the stark and profoundly buzz-killing limitations of Starship tech at the time of recording. So, assuming we don't want ours to be a posthumous or legacy journey, we're going to need to take a few liberties with the known boundaries of physics, specifically in the domains of gravity manipulation, faster-than-light propulsion, thrusters, inertia dampeners, broad-range scanners and detectors, cloaking devices, futuristic weapons tech, and various other sorts of gizmos a space gang of vagabonds might find handy to have in their back pocket. And with that all in mind, let us now take some inspiration from some real-world examples of free-range ne'er-do-wells for our interstellar mothership. As any student of history or warfare, no matter how amateur, won't need me to tell them, most of our fictional hero crafts tend to take after the design philosophy and profiles of those vessels preferred by earthbound pirates, guerrilla gangs, militia groups, and elite commando units. Small, speedy, stealthy gunboats, Spartan and specialist crafts, tricked-out gadget wagons, repurposed space tractors, and so on. Now, a few common factors you'll notice in all these examples are that they're primarily short-range craft, designed for rapid excursion or insertion into generally inhospitable environments to perform generally dangerous tasks. Their crew size is usually between 5 and 8, though they can be effectively sailed by just 1 or 2 men if needs be, and can usually accommodate between 10 and 20 passengers, depending on how much they all like each other. A few examples I personally really like from fiction are, unsurprisingly to those who aren't new around here, from the Star Wars expanded universe. Although you may be mildly surprised to hear that mine are not the usual fan favorites everyone's always gushing over. Don't get me wrong, I have no particular gripes with those ships per se. They're each fine in and of themselves, they're just not really my style. That is, they're not what I would personally pick to fly if I suddenly found myself in a galaxy far, far away with an infinite budget and a low midichlorian count. So if I was going to build myself a personal galaxy craft, again assuming money's no object, how and where would I go about getting the ball rolling? Well, seeing as the main functional purpose of a starship is as a life-preserving box to transport our 5-man band of fragile chemical meatbags from point A to point B through the vacuum of space, and also to guard them from all the other hazards therein, it stands to my reason that this is where our design's foundation should start. So starting with the 3 non-negotiables of life, food, water, sleep, and oxygen, we'll need to ensure that each member of our band has enough calories, nutrients, and fluids to sustain them in fighting condition for the duration of any journey, as well as having adequate bunk and cabin space to get proper rest and exercise. After all, ours is going to be a pretty short and boring adventure if we're too tired or stiff to move when we get to wherever it is we're going. Now, funnily enough, the most troublesome of the above problems are going to be the oxygen and fluid parts of the survival equation. We can fairly easily store enough dehydrated rations for 5 men for up to a week, since they won't be getting very physical inside of a box, roughly the size of a World War II bomber, which I think would be the optimal size for our needs. Large enough to not be claustrophobic, but not so cumbersome as to draw needless strain out of our propulsion or life support systems. Speaking of which, as these are what will be literally and figuratively responsible for keeping our intrepid squad's lights on, you'd think it only right and sensible to build our Frontier Arc's framework off of these 2 foundational blocks. But neither of these will take you anywhere without power. And so by pure logical and technical necessity, that must be our actual inaugural jump point. As we explored over in the Mech Tech, Mech Design, and Post-Industrial Tech series, the main functional delineation between the different power plant types is their energy density and volatility. Since ours is inevitably going to see action in combat, even though it may or may not be explicitly designed as a warship, it is worth bearing in mind that sooner or later it is going to take a hit, possibly from something outside of its weight class, depending on whose laws we're going to be violating most frequently. Therefore, any reactor or engine that depends on combustible fuels is always going to be a liability. Nuclear is generally safer and has a longer fuel range, but converting that energy into thrust in a vacuum tends to either rely on extremely sketchy concepts or some new exotic powers we've yet to unlock on our IRL civilizational tech trees. Also, there's the potentially fatal issue of heat dissipation. According to physics, there are 4 methods of transferring heat: conduction, transfer between 2 adjacent surfaces; convection, transfer from a surface via motion of an adjacent fluid; evaporation, transfer from a surface via the changing state of an adjacent fluid; and radiation, transfer via emission of electromagnetic waves. You'll notice that 3 of those require direct contact with other matter in order to work. This is why real-life spacecraft have these colossal panels everywhere, not just to collect ambient energy, which can also be useful for ours as a form of backup reserve, but to stop the ship from accidentally slagging itself under the heat of its own generic functions piling up without ample escape vectors. And of course, the Space Shuttle, ISS, and Mars probes aren't getting into dogfights or opening extra spatial wormholes. And this is where I'm going to bring us back around to the big question from the start. Do we want more science fiction or science fantasy? The answer will determine how susceptible we and our newfangled Playmobil are to the laws of physics, and just how much we need to care about mundane things like rations, crew amenities like beds and toilets, and environmental hazards like micrometeors and cosmic rays. Settings that take Isaac Asimov for all he's worth have ray and deflection shields to guard against all threats that aren't specifically plot relevant. Plus, they'll have fancy gadgets like inertial dampeners to couch the squishy water sacs inside from the otherwise terminal forces of mega and metaluminal accelerations. And of course, they have artificial gravity generators to spare both the production studios and the writers the hassle of working around their actors floating about the cabin. And let's be honest, there's just something inherently lame about watching a grown man bob about in a tube like a trapped soap bubble that simply makes it impossible to take seriously in an action-oriented context. In case you haven't picked up what I'm putting down yet, for maximal childlike enjoyment, and also for ease of use, ease of maintenance, ease of video scripting and editing, etc., our pet rocket ship is going to take strongly after my personal favorite Star Wars hero ships, although I use the word hero a bit more loosely in this case. Starkiller's Rogue Shadow from The Force Unleashed, mainly for its superior stealth capabilities and size, with additional inspiration being taken from the real-world P-69 Black Widow and Darth Maul's Sith Infiltrator for the internal configuration and external profile, respectively, Marvel's Quinjet for the concealed weapons, gadgets, and additional functions, and also some light, pseudo-organic tech heresy will be employed from the likes of the Vong, Tyrannid, the Mass Effect Reapers, and the Necron's skeletal fleets to give ours a margin for error and a level of adaptability similar to an organic life form. As well, this would, hopefully, encourage a more symbiotic relationship with her crew and, if applicable, any onboard AI or humanoid droid companions. Speaking of which, I suppose I should probably bring up the other big cornerstones of autonomous, possibly nano-machines, spaceborne weaponry, and FTL propulsion now, shouldn't I? Well, you see, the problem with that is that this video's growing past where I'd originally meant to clip it off, and as I have significantly more to say on those last few parts than can be comfortably crammed into a handful of paragraphs, I'm going to save all of that for the next round. So, if that's something that interests you, be sure to leave a comment to that effect. Or, you could also just hit the like, subscribe, or join buttons. I'm sure I'd get the point either way. And of course, you can also go check out my books over on Amazon, some of which have somewhat to do with ships, and one has to do with tech stuff. And in any event, as always, stay safe, stay sane, and remember, time is your more precious asset than air. You can always take another breath until you run out of time. Peace be upon you.